A Russian armored column punches forward, then the whole attack collapses in seconds because the first blast does not come from the sky. It comes from under the tracks. Several tanks and BMPs were left burning in place, while the rest of the column was forced to stop, boxed in with no clear route forward or back. This was not a random battlefield setback. It was a warning sign that a method once considered standard in modern warfare is becoming dangerously exposed. Russian forces pushed a large mechanized column across open terrain, relying on speed and smoke screens to mask movement and break through Ukrainian defensive lines. From the first moments, Ukrainian drones were already overhead, watching the formation take shape and move. When the lead vehicles were hit and the rear was blocked, the entire column lost. What followed revealed something deeper than a single ambush. Ukraine did not rely on one weapon or one strike. It applied a layered combat system. This raises a critical question. How did a force protected by smoke, armor, and modern equipment collapse so quickly once it was detected? And more importantly, what does this pattern say about the future of large-scale mechanized warfare in an age where the sky is always watching? The Russian mechanized advance began with confidence, but it quickly ran into a battlefield where exposure mattered more than armor. The column moved across open terrain in tight formation, relying on speed and thick smoke to block direct observation and reduce the chance of immediate fire from Ukrainian positions. When the front vehicle is stopped, the vehicles behind it face a brutal choice, since they can either bunch up and risk a kill zone, or spread out and risk losing control of spacing and direction. The goal was simple and direct: cross the open ground fast, keep momentum, and reach the next line before defenders could react. What the crews could not see was that Ukrainian FPV drones were already overhead before the movement fully developed. These drones did not appear suddenly after contact because they were airborne early and waiting for the column to commit. As the formation pushed forward, the drones followed quietly, marking the rhythm of the advance and watching how vehicles aligned on the route. This early tracking changed the balance before the first strike landed, because timing and position were already known. The first hits came against the lead vehicles. An FPV dropped low and struck the front of the column, stopping the vehicle that defined direction and pace. This is the moment the fight stops being about breaking through fast and becomes a hunt, because each vehicle must pick a path while the defender tries to turn that path into a trap. Turning around was impossible, pushing forward was blocked, and spreading out only increased exposure. Engines idled, smoke drifted unevenly, and the formation that relied on speed suddenly stood still in the open. This pause was not a small delay. The crews inside the vehicles faced a shrinking set of options with every passing second. FPV drones did not rush to finish the column at once. Instead, they hovered and repositioned, keeping pressure constant while the formations. Each visible adjustment by the drivers and commanders revealed more about the situation on the ground. Some vehicles tried to edge forward using the smoke as cover, but the plume others remained stationary, hoping the situation would reset, yet nothing changed. The overhead view stayed clear enough to maintain control of the scene. What mattered most at this stage was not destruction, but control. The drones had forced the column into a fixed position where initiative shifted completely to the defenders. Inside the vehicles, crews understood the danger. Hatches stayed shut, radios filled with short updates, and spacing that once felt safe now felt. While the armored line is getting shaken, Russian infantry is still advancing inside the trenches and waiting for more reinforcements, which shows a push that tries to keep pressure even when the steel fist is slipping. Once locked in place, the column became a static problem that could be addressed step by step. This is the risk facing large mechanized pushes in a sky filled with cheap, and what unfolded next did not begin with explosions, but with stillness. That stillness marked the end of the advance as an offensive action and the beginning of a defensive struggle in open ground. Once the column was forced to stop, the fight shifted from movement to exploitation, and this was where Ukrainian fire coordination took full control. Reconnaissance drones that had tracked the advance now focused on precision, passing exact positions to artillery units that were already prepared to act. With close fire hitting at the edges and indirect fire hitting from depth, Russian units face pressure from two directions at once, and that squeezes their options fast. Some vehicles try to back out, others attempt to move around wrecks, and the infantry in the trenches are left pushing forward while waiting for the armored layer to recover. In the footage, the picture changes from a single damaged lead tank to a wider push, with multiple vehicles appearing and a supporting fire plan that is meant to crush trenches and clear lanes. This is a classic answer when momentum is lost, since commanders often believe the fastest fix is to add steel and add shells, then overwhelm the defenders before they can reset. In several cases, drones slipped into these gaps and detonated inside, turning the vehicle itself into a source of damage. The most destructive moments came when drones reached areas where ammunition was stored. Once penetrated, the blast did not stop with the initial explosion. Stored rounds ignited, pressure built instantly, and secondary detonations ripped through the interior. Turrets lifted, panels burst outward, and nearby vehicles were showered with. These chain reactions changed the character of the battlefield within minutes. A single FPV hit no longer affected one vehicle alone, because burning wrecks blocked movement, spread fire, and forced crews near. Inside the column, the situation grew chaotic. Crews faced a harsh choice between staying inside armored shells under rising heat or exiting into open ground, still watched from. Some vehicles attempted to return fire, but firing without movement only revealed positions more clearly to observers overhead. A mine strike does not only damage the vehicle that hits it, since it also throws fragments, dust, and shock into the path of nearby crews, and it forces the rest to brake hard or change route. The pace of fire reflected control rather than urgency, with each strike placed to maintain pressure rather than rush destruction. Ukraine's artillery is also described as continuing to fire to hold the tempo down, which means the goal is not only to destroy targets, but to immobilize them and keep them from escaping. Every round and every drone strike built on the last shrinking options for the trapped formation. The appearance of repeated secondary explosions carried a psychological weight as well. Crews watching neighboring vehicles erupt understood what that meant for survival. Confidence faded quickly once it became clear that armor no longer the damage spread faster than any single weapon could achieve on its own. By the end of this phase, the column was no longer a fighting force moving toward an objective. It had become a cluster of disabled vehicles, burning wrecks, and exposed crews reacting under constant observation. The fight was still ongoing, but its direction was no. What followed next built directly on this collapse, as deeper strikes and broader effects began to unfold beyond the immediate battlefield. The battle expanded beyond the trapped column once Russian air defense assets were drawn into the open, and this marked a critical shift in the fight. Vehicles burned on the ground, Ukrainian reconnaissance began scanning deeper, searching for the systems meant to protect the area from attacks coming from the sky. Hidden air defense units depend on silence and stillness to survive. As long as radars remain dark and launchers stay immobile, they are difficult to locate in cluttered terrain. Ukrainian scouts detected signs of a Russian air defense system attempting to reposition. The change did not need to be dramatic, because even limited movement altered patterns that had, in other cases, brief radar activity or command transmissions created a signal that stood out against the background. From that moment, the position was no longer hidden. Coordinates were refined through aerial observation, and confirmation followed within minutes. The system that had been guarding the rear of the battlefield became a target instead of a shield. The response came from long range. HIMARS units received the location and prepared a strike using guided rockets designed for precision rather than saturation. There was no need for repeated fire because accuracy mattered more than volume. A Bradley is useful in this role because it can deliver troops and fire at the same time, so it acts like a shield for movement while also adding pressure on exposed positions. When the smoke cleared, the system that had protected Russian forces from aerial threats was gone. The loss carried consequences far beyond the destruction. Even so, the armor is described as withstanding the damage, and that detail matters because it keeps the Bradley in the fight long enough to complete its mission of suppressing and supporting the trench line. This moment also shows how both sides think, since Russia is trying to cut off the vehicle that protects Ukrainian infantry movement, while Ukraine is trying to keep the infantry line from being overwhelmed by numbers. The sky became less contested, and that advantage fed directly back into ground operations. For Russian units still fighting near the stalled column, this shift was. The source describes FPV drones beginning a real hunt for Russian tanks. And the key point is that these drones do not wait for the column to stop on its own. This change also affected decision-making. Without reliable air defense cover, attempts to reorganize or move equipment became more dangerous. Any movement risked immediate detection, while staying still invited continued pressure from drones and artillery. The importance of this moment lies in its timing. The air defense system was not destroyed at the start of the engagement, but at a point when Russian forces were already under strain. Once the shield was gone, the remaining forces operated under constant exposure. This phase did not end the battle on its own, but with fewer threats in the air, Ukrainian drones could press harder and stay longer. The ground below reflected that change as pressure increased and options narrowed. By removing a key defensive layer, the engagement crossed a threshold. What followed built on this advantage, as coordinated ground forces moved to exploit the opening created by precision. The fight on the ground shifted into a coordinated assault once Ukrainian armored units moved to exploit the opening created from above. With Russian formations already disrupted, Leopard 2 tanks took positions along covered routes and tree lines, waiting for movement to reveal targets. The ambush unfolded quickly. A Russian vehicle at the front of a small formation rolled forward and struck a mine, stopping instantly and blocking the narrow path behind it. Seconds later, another armored vehicle tried to maneuver around the disabled hull, but a Leopard round hit it directly, turning it into a burning obstacle. That sequence broke cohesion at once. Armored personnel carriers behind the lead vehicles halted in confusion, and infantry began to dismount under pressure. Without clear direction or cover, soldiers abandoned their vehicles and scattered, leaving equipment exposed in the open. Leopard crews did not rush the area. They held distance and shifted ammunition, switching from anti-armor rounds to high-explosive shells once resistance thinned. These shells were aimed at enemy-held buildings and field positions near the contact line. Each impact tore through walls and roofs, collapsing strongpoints that infantry could not clear safely on. After every shot, the tanks adjusted position slightly. This movement reduced the risk of return fire and made it harder for any surviving Russian elements to fix their location. The advance remained controlled rather than fast, with each action designed to limit exposure. In another sector of the battlefield, a similar pattern unfolded with different equipment. A Ukrainian Abrams received coordinates for a multi-story structure where Russian forces had taken cover. The tank halted, stabilized its gun, and fired a single round that punched into the building. A second shot followed, and the structure partially collapsed, removing the position as a defensive anchor. Once the building was neutralized, Bradley infantry fighting vehicles they approached under cover, using their cannons to suppress windows, doorways, and nearby positions. This fire kept remaining defenders pinned while infantry closed the distance. But the twist is that the HIMARS are described as decoys, and the source stresses that the difference is hard to spot from a distance, so an expensive strike ends up buying noise and smoke rather than real capability loss. Unmanned aerial vehicles remained overhead throughout this phase. They scanned for movement, confirmed hits, and warned of any attempt to regroup or counterattack. When new targets, this integration changed the rhythm of the fight. Russian units could not rely on isolated positions or brief pauses to recover. Every attempt to shift forces was observed, and every delay increased This approach reduced unnecessary exposure and preserved momentum. Instead of pushing deep into unknown areas, Ukrainian units cleared methodically, turning local success into stable. The ground fight became an extension of the earlier aerial advantage rather than a separate contest. By this stage, Russian resistance had shifted from organized defense to scattered survival. Vehicles left behind became hazards rather than assets, and positions that once offered cover turned into The final stage of the engagement revealed a complete multi-layer trap, where every action fed the next and left the attacking force with no safe exit. What unfolded was not a single strike, but a sequence that began long before contact and ended with the collapse of both structure and morale. The process started quietly with signal collection. Radio traffic, short transmissions, and movement patterns provided clues about unit locations and intent. Once this information was gathered, drones moved in to confirm what had been suspected, fixing positions and tracking changes as they happened. With targets identified, FPV drones and precision fire took over. These strikes did not aim to destroy everything at once, because the goal was control rather than speed. Each hit forced a reaction, and each reaction exposed new weaknesses that could be exploited from above. That is why the battlefield starts to look like a managed trap, since targets are not only hit, they are tracked, fixed, and finished when they stop or when they are forced into narrow lanes. Drivers who attempted to reverse or detour found themselves under fire again, with no clear direction that offered safety. As pressure increased, the battlefield narrowed. Burning wrecks blocked roads, damaged hulls limited space, and smoke marked every failed attempt to move. The formation was Ukraine, on the other hand, will be tested on endurance because UAV spotting, artillery timing, and FPV hunt teams must stay coordinated to keep the kill chain alive. The effect of this system went far beyond equipment losses. Once tempo was lost, decisions became slower and less coherent. Orders arrived. Command disruption followed naturally. With leaders struggling to understand the situation, units